There's been a twist in the extradition dispute embroiling Canada, China, and the U.S. The Canadian government has long insisted it will not politically intervene in U.S. efforts to extradite Huawei's CFO. But now a Canadian official is being accused of doing just that. Yesterday, Canada's ambassador to China, John McCallum, suggested Meng Wanzhou has a good chance of avoiding extradition. The CBC's Katie Simpson is here with the details of what Ambassador McCallum said. Take us through his comments and why they're controversial, Katie.
Essentially, he called together reporters who work for outlets that have mainly Chinese viewership in Canada, and he essentially argued for the release, advocating for the release of Meng Wanzhou, the CFO of Huawei, who was arrested in Canada at the request of the Americans who put forward an extradition request. He said it would be an unhappy outcome if Ms. Meng is extradited to the United States. He also offered essentially some advice to Meng's lawyers about how they should argue their case. Have a listen.
I think she has quite good arguments on her side. One, political involvement by comments from Donald Trump in her case.
So you'll remember back in December, after this arrest happened, Donald Trump was interviewed by Reuters, and he said he'd be willing to use Ms. Meng as a pawn or as a sort of a way to gain leverage in the trade war with China. So given that this is such a sensitive legal matter before the courts, it is unusual to hear someone of this position of authority within the Canadian government just be so candid about his thoughts on the process. The Prime Minister was asked if he shares Ambassador McCallum's opinion on this, and he was very careful to avoid weighing in.
Part of the strength of our justice system is people get to mount their own defense, and I know she will do that. We will ensure as a government and as a country that all the rules and the independence of our justice system is properly defended and properly supported.
So the Prime Minister he wasn't criticizing John McCallum for those comments, but he certainly didn't make the same sort of assertions when he was asked about it today.
So the news conference lasted about 40 minutes. Mostly Chinese language media was invited, but it was attended by various Canadian media. Ambassador McCallum also referenced the sort of trade war between the U.S. and China, almost shifting blame away from Canada. What do you make of those remarks? And
we've seen Chrystia Freeland sort of point out, we saw her do this yesterday, point out, hey, you know what? Ms. Meng has done nothing wrong in Canada. She's not accused of anything wrong in Canada. The accusations are coming from the United States, and we sort of were questioning, okay, is this an overall shift from the government, a change in strategy to try and give Canada a little bit of wiggle room and perhaps place some blame on the Americans? Whether that is the strategy at this point, anyone who is a former diplomat that we've been speaking with today says in no way can John McCallum's comments be part of the government's strategy, because this is such a sensitive issue that they really question why he would have been so candid with these reporters. But he also spoke about the Canada-U.S. dynamic here and really questioned why the Americans even came forward with this request in the first place.
Now, I cannot speak for the motives of the United States. You'd have to ask Donald Trump or someone in the U.S. government. I never expected that we would have this problem thrown at us. The government of Canada never expected that this would happen, but it did, and we have to deal with it.
So the question is, will American officials be upset with his comments? Do they feel that this has jeopardized their case against Ms. Meng? At this point, I am told no Americans have reached out to formally complain. At least what I'm hearing is no one has reached out to formally complain to the embassy in Washington. But everyone is waiting to see if now Canada is in a really uncomfortable position, not just with China, but also with our traditional close ally, the United States.
All right, thanks a lot, Katie. The CBC's Katie Simpson. So was the government surprised to hear John McCallum's comments? Is it expecting any fallout from them, either in China or with the U.S.? Arif Virani is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada, and he joins us now from Toronto. Hi, Mr. Virani. Nice to see you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me, Bashi.
These comments by Ambassador McCallum, do they constitute the official position of the Government of Canada as it prepares to receive the formal request for extradition from the U.S.?
The comments that were made by Ambassador McCallum, who's doing an excellent job as ambassador, I would add, and has the full support of our government, were made in the context of a press conference he gave with the various media outlets that it was just mentioned in your conversation with Katie. The issue that we are taking and this position of the government has been crystal clear articulated by the Prime Minister and by Minister Freeland. We are dealing with a matter that is a rule of law matter. It is the application of an extradition treaty between Canada and the United States. A request was made for provisional arrest. That request was acted upon by government officials, not by any political actors. And now we are proceeding at a stage where an arrest was made, bail was granted, bail conditions have been observed, and we are awaiting a formal request from the Americans for an actual extradition. We have yet to receive that. They have 60 days to provide us with that from the date of December 1st. So that takes us to about the end of January. That's the situation we're at. But the official position of the Government of Canada is that this is a rule of law matter. We believe in the rule of law. We believe in it as a bedrock of our democracy and indeed of the international rules-based system. We support it, and we are asking all allies to support it and be vocal in their support of it, including when it affects Canadians that are being arbitrarily detained in other parts of the world, including in China.
That's different, though, Mr. Vrani, than what Ambassador McCallum said. He said it would be an unhappy outcome, quote unquote, if Ms. Meng was extradited. He also said that she had a strong case against fighting this extradition. Are we to take from your comments there that your government rejects what Mr. McCallum said?
So Minister McCallum offered some of his views about potential defenses, etc. I'm not going to go into those in any detail. The Prime Minister's not going to go into those in any detail.
He's an ambassador representing your government. I'm sorry to interrupt, but he's an ambassador representing our country and your government in China. This is not just Mr. McCallum, even just an MP representing Markham, nor a minister. He is an ambassador representing Canadians and your government. You know, do you not have to recognize that his comments have significance, and does your government reject them?
The comments were made by Minister McCallum today. They're receiving extensive coverage. What was also mentioned by Minister McCallum at the same press conference, Vashi, with all due respect, is that there's been no political interference whatsoever with this process thus far. It has been entirely a legal process handled by Department of Justice officials. It will then enter into a judicial process, at which time a request is received, and if an authorization to proceed is issued by Department of Justice officials. That is kept separate from political involvement for a reason, and the reason is because ultimately the final decision on surrendering a person to a foreign entity is made by the Minister of Justice. In this case, that would be made by Minister Lametti. We guard that those buckets separate and in separate silos for a very specific reason, because they need to be treated as a rule of law matter and not politicized. That is what we are abiding by. That is what we stand by. That is a position we have always taken, regardless of whether Minister McCallum made those comments that he's made today or not. Our position is that we are not opining on defenses or other aspects of potential defenses that could be raised. But it is important for viewers to know that due process means that you can raise defenses. Any person facing extradition has the ability, even at the point of time when it gets to the desk of the Minister of Justice, to raise your concerns, and indeed once the minister even makes a decision, to seek a judicial review or appeal of that decision. That's what due process means in a democracy. That's what we believe in, that's how we've structured this country, and that's what we're following in this case.
Did the Government of Canada know that Ambassador McCallum would be making these comments?
I have no information on that, Vashi. You'd have to ask Minister McCallum or potentially.
You make the very valid point that in his comments he also did say, you're absolutely right, that there has not been any political interference. Do his comments to the effect of an unhappy outcome, he is opining on the outcome of a process your government has insisted is free from political interference. Does that not constitute political interference?
I think it's important to understand that the comments were made. It's also important to understand what's being said by the Prime Minister, by Minister Freeland, by myself right now to your viewing audience, that we will not opine on this particular case.
But the ambassador can.
What we will say, Vashi, is that there are instances, just for people to understand the process, where we don't extradite. We don't tend to extradite to countries that enforce the death penalty. If a situation like that arises, we seek assurances that the death penalty won't be used. There are parameters under which extradition is not issued as a general, in the general course, and that is important for viewers to understand. And what Minister McCallum was explaining is that defenses can be mounted. There have been concerns expressed.
Actually, I have to interrupt. I'm sorry, but he's not explaining that defenses can be mounted. He said, he said specifically that she has some strong arguments she can make before a judge. Then he went over 3 aspects of the defense that she could make and said she has quite good arguments on her side. What you're saying is totally free of political interference. I get that she can make a defense, that's part of the way the legal system works here. What Ambassador McCallum said was, here's what her defense could be, and it would be an unhappy outcome if that defense didn't work.
And what Ambassador McCallum has been doing is been working very hard in terms of this entire relationship, the Canada-China relationship. He's been working very hard in defense of the 2 people that have been arbitrarily detained and the person who's been subjected now to the death penalty, Mr. Schellenberg. He's been in direct contact with the families, providing consular assistance. He's doing incredible work for the safety and security of those Canadians, and I think we should be thankful for that. In terms of his comments today, what he was outlining was comments that relate to potential defenses. I'm not going to comment on those defenses. It would be inappropriate for me to do so in my capacity as the Parliamentary Secretary to the same minister who will ultimately potentially be facing the decision as to whether to offer over Ms. Meng Wanzhou over to the Americans in the instance of a surrender. That would not be appropriate in this context. And we are saying, as we've said all along, Vashti, I know it's somewhat frustrating, and I'm not trying to be dodgy in terms of your questions, but we can't comment on the particulars of a case that would ultimately be before us for a very sensitive decision.
If it's inappropriate for you, Mr. Varani, though, to make those kind of comments, is it not inappropriate of the ambassador to do the same?
What I would say is that I would stick by what has been said by the Prime Minister and Minister Freeland. What I'm saying to you today is that we can comment on how extradition works, on the timing and the process and how it rolls out. We can comment on the fact that defenses can always be mounted, appeals can be raised, but commenting substantively on those defenses and their qualitative merits is not for me to do at this time.
But you won't comment on the ambassador's comments in that respect?
What I will say,
I'm asking a very straightforward question. You're being very clear that it's inappropriate to say things like it would be an unhappy outcome, or to talk about the types of defense presented, or that it's strong. That is what Ambassador McCallum did. Is it inappropriate in the view of the government to do so?
So let me explain it to you this way, Vashti. So it's important because what we observe is a rule called sub judice, and I don't mean to use too much Latin on CBC here, but it's this idea that when something is before decision makers in a democratic country need to be free from influence. And the idea is that if this matter goes from the Department of Justice officials, if they receive a request, to then a Superior Court justice for determination, those Superior Court judges are named by the Minister of Justice. For the Minister of Justice or a cabinet member to opine about the merits of a case one way or the other would be seen to potentially or directly be influencing the neutral decision-making of that Superior Court justice.
And won't the ambassador's comments do the exact same thing?
And what I'm saying to you is that we are not commenting as a cabinet or as a government on the quality of any defenses that are mounted or the types of defenses that should be mounted.
Is Ambassador McCallum's job in jeopardy? Will there be any consequences for his comments?
We stand firmly behind Ambassador McCallum. You may recall that I worked as his parliamentary secretary in year 1, where we were bringing over 50,000 Syrian refugees in a time span when people thought we shouldn't even try to bring over 25,000. He's a man who's dedicated his life to the service of this country, and he has the full support of the government.
Thank you so much for your time, Mr. Varani. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.